where you got that.
Wipes.
A chalice lit in our midst is a symbol of our liberal faith, a faith built on the foundations of freedom, reason, and welcome, a faith sustained by acts of kindness and justice, a faith that envisions a world flourishing with equality for all people, a faith that demands the living out of goodness, a faith that requires thoughtfulness, a faith of wholeness. This tiny flame is the symbol of the spark of all this within each of us. And now if you have a joy or a concern, this is your opportunity to share a lit candle with the fellowship, or perhaps just light a candle with you in your own space, but please let us know if there are candles you wish us to light.
We're lighting a candle for a family here in Sheridan, the Mullins. David lost his life to COVID very, very suddenly a week ago. And we know that their grief is deep. So please light a candle for the Mullins. Oops. Keep that.
Victor, would you light a candle for my mom? She had her first radiation treatment Thursday and is doing well.
Certainly keep her in our thoughts.
I'll light one. I lit this candle for all of the people that live among us but live by themselves, who don't have a family member in the house. I know we're all lonely, but it's especially tough for people who don't have to share their space, they don't have to share their air, but they are alone. So that would include one of our sons, and our other son and his wife and daughter are virtually alone. They've been in Spokane nearly a year and don't know a soul other than to wave at a neighbor or two. So there's a lot of loneliness, and we need to do what we can to mitigate that. And all those folks are in our hearts today.
Maybe, can you hear me?
Yes.
And maybe I'll have you light a candle for my friend Michelle here in Gillette. She lost a friend of hers, a guy who was kind of a father figure, last fall to COVID. And she's struggling with guilt over that because she thinks he caught it from her when they had lunch together. So, you know, maybe not. And I've told her not to let that eat at her, but maybe a little good thoughts her direction would be in order. Thank you.
So we'll light one final candle for joys or concerns unspoken.
So So if there are children in the area, Victor has a story for you this morning. Oh, I have a story for you this morning. I forgot I was reading that story. So if there's a child out there, let me know, because there's one word I thought maybe we would define if there was a child. And otherwise, we will speak to your young spirits, each of you.
Emmett's here.
Hi, Emmett. Good to have you. The word I was going to define, and Emmett, you may already know it, but it's
Bruce is here.
and Bruce. They talk about a communal gift, and a communal gift is a gift that is given by the community. So I just wanted to make sure you knew that word. I think it's a beautiful word. This is called a gift for grandfather. Grandfather's birthday was coming. Family and friends would gather, but what to bring him? What gift would be right? A nice sweater? Socks? A new shirt? No, he hadn't even opened the packages from last year. A book? A painting? No, his shelves and walls were crowded already. What to do? Most of all, grandfather liked to be at home, sitting in his chair, drinking tea with honey. Honey, that was it. Grandfather had a beautiful big crock jar that sat empty on his shelf. They would fill it with enough honey to last the year. Word spread from one family member to another, and from one friend to the other. Soon everyone knew that they were each to bring a jar of honey to pour into grandfather's big crock. It would be a communal gift. Jane was going to the party. She didn't have any honey and she didn't have much money. What to do? She thought and thought some more, and then an idea came to her. It's safe to say it wasn't the best idea, but Jane really wanted to go and she really wanted to be part of the gift. So she poured some water into a small jar and added a pinch of food coloring so that it was golden in color and looked just like honey. She told herself, no one will notice once I add it to the big jar. Besides that, it will help the honey, it will make the honey easier to pour. The day of the party came. The guests arrived, and one guest after another poured their small jars of honey into grandfather's big crock. Jane poured hers in too. Before long, the crock was filled to the brim with honey, and it was time to present it to grandfather. What's this? He asked. A few guests offered clues. Some made buzzing sounds. Others licked their lips. Could it be honey? Said grandfather. How wonderful. He dipped in a spoon to sample the golden liquid and lifted it to his lips. He smacked a few times, looking a little puzzled. It has a fine golden color, he said hesitantly, but it tastes like water. Jane's cheeks burned a bright red. John's cheeks were equally rosy. Gillian covered her eyes and Jim covered his mouth. Jason looked down. They had all played the same trick as Jane. None of them thought it would make much of a difference if they brought water instead of honey, but now each and every one of them was embarrassed. It was an awkward moment. Luckily, grandfather laughed and said, I have another birthday coming next year. You can bet that the next year when grandfather's birthday came again, everyone was sure to bring the very best honey possible. They poured their small jars into grandfather's crock, and when he tasted it, honey. Grandfather said that he could taste the flavor of each person's gift. There was a hint of orange blossom from Jane's honey and fireweed from John's. There were the scents of clover, buckwheat, and wildflowers from Jim, Gillian and Jason's contributions. Grandfather smacked his lips. This is the most delicious honey ever. The party was a much happier one. That's the end of the story. So what strikes you about this story?
About that story. That it's better to be honest than to never lie for just to get out of doing something nice for someone. Like, you just come through. Just don't like lie a bunch because you never know what could happen.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah, you need to, you know, one person thought, well, my little part of this communal gift doesn't make any difference. But if everybody were to do that and not contribute their share, you end up with some funny looking water, don't you? Yep. So the idea of a communal gift is really what we do for ourselves and bring to each other when we meet like this and share this time together, because we each have something to bring, just like one person brought honey that tasted like orange blossoms, one like fireweed, and so on. We each have something unique to add to our communal life. Thanks for sharing, Emmett.
Thank you.
Hello, everybody. And for people that don't know me, my name is Victor Asher. Our theme for this month is leadership and authority. I would like to lead you all now in a meditation. So I'm going to do a short reading, and that will be followed by an opportunity for silent reflection. And after that, we will sing Spirit of Life together. So these are the words of Marcus Aurelius, who was a Stoic philosopher in Roman times. Treat with utmost respect your power of forming opinions, for this power alone guards you against making assumptions that are contrary to nature and judgments that overthrow the rule of reason. It enables you to learn from experience and to live in harmony with others. Thank you, Jules, for that assistance. My talk this morning is called Balancing Authority with Reason, Science, and Individual Conscience. Can everybody hear me okay? Okay. I think all who have presented thus far on the theme of authority and leadership have in one way or another encouraged us to take ownership of ourselves and to take responsibility for what we believe and how we practice our faith. Reverend Colley spoke about the need to recover from the trauma of shame that perhaps all of us have endured by employing resilience and mindfulness. She invited us to be authorities to ourselves. She promoted trust in ourselves and in the practice of self-efficacy. Ian spoke to the question of why our country has taken a dramatic turn towards fascism. He attributed the shift to blindly placing trust in authority as a means of healing from trauma. In the talk Michelle gave last Sunday, the focus was on the responsibility for developing personal authority as opposed to traditional religious authority through reliance on conscience. This month's theme seems very timely to me. Although it is a declining number, about a third of our nation approved of President Trump's leadership and his authority. Among Republicans, about 70% believe that the election was stolen, according to recent polls. Some who blindly followed the lies and conspiracy theories were led to storm our Capitol, resulting in lost lives, injury of police, and damage to sacred property. I have been asking myself over the past few years why so many Americans approve of a demonstrably flawed leader. What determines whom we choose to have faith in? How do we go about the process of deciding in whom we place our faith and trust? It has been shown that Trump has repeatedly lied, that he has acted selfishly rather than in the interests of the country, that he has treated badly people whom he has felt betrayed him, even though they were acting in the interest of the country and following the law. There is something other than truth and reason that appears to motivate many of those who have supported Trump. Is it fear? Is it anger? Is it a barrage of misinformation perpetrated by nefarious profit-driven media? Or is it a desire to hold on to white privilege that lures people to follow? Are Trump enablers willing to sacrifice truth, justice, democracy, and the law for the sake of baser motives and objectives? What do such political questions have to do with how we lead our spiritual lives? Well, I think we can ask similar questions with regard to whom and to what we place authority when we choose to follow a particular spiritual path. Authority and leadership are at least as important in matters of faith as they are in politics. Surely there have been many false messiahs in the religious sphere as in the political. Reverend Moon, Reverend Jim Jones, and Elizabeth Clare Prophet come to my mind. What motivates us to embrace a particular religious authority? Some religious people grow up in a particular faith tradition and never question its authority. For them, it is as natural as the kinds of food they prefer or where they choose to live, what kind of work they pursue, and whom they marry. Stepping outside of that might feel awkward and anxiety-provoking. Their faith is just a familiar part of their lives that is never questioned. The danger here is that when one invests in an authority and a tradition, it becomes more difficult to maintain objectivity, even if that tradition veers very far from its founding principles. As an example, many fundamentalist Christians have ignored the basic teachings of Jesus in their allegiance to pastors that encourage the support of Trump, who obviously falls far from a Christian life. Parishioners in these fundamentalist churches seem to blindly follow their pastor and some prominent leaders and what they tell them. A feature of the faith of my early life, Judaism, has a ceremony I see value in, that of the bar mitzvah. I assume confirmation in the Catholic faith is similar. A pre-adolescent or adolescent presumably makes a conscious choice to participate actively in the faith they grew up in. As we are aware, at that tender age, it is less of an informed choice than it would be for an older person. When I had my bar mitzvah, I did not at all question the tenets of my faith. The questioning came a few years later. Nevertheless, rites of passage ceremonies at least acknowledge that one needs to make one's own choice when it comes to religious belief and practice. It is one thing to be brought up in a religion and another to consciously embrace it. To paraphrase, an unexamined faith is not worth believing in or practicing. So here is the question I would like for us to explore this morning. What should be the balance between thinking for ourselves and relying on authority? I am sure that none of us in this fellowship make decisions blindly following an authority without questioning. UUs are known for our questioning. You may have heard the old joke about UUs in heaven. Upon death and arriving at a fork in the road with one sign pointing to heaven and the other sign pointing to the place where, the existence of heaven is being debated. UUs would rather join the debate group. On a more serious note, some of you know the introductory primer called Our Chosen Faith. Only a minority of UUs grew up in a Unitarian Universalist church or fellowship. Most of us chose to become UUs as adults. I would like to suggest that choosing a spiritual path might be analogous to buying a car, at least in some ways. You can decide based on what your parents owned. My dad always bought Chevys, so that's what I buy. Alternatively, you can spend time thinking about the aspects that matter most. For example, how large, how fuel efficient, what color, what features, and so on. You might look at repair records for different cars, use Consumer Reports ratings, and talk to your mechanic and your friends. In the latter case, you would be relying on a combination of authority-based and fact-based information in addition to personal preference in choosing a car. In the former case, just doing what your parents did would be to rely on authority alone. Some will join or continue in a faith community simply because they like the people there. These folks might care very little about what is being preached and what the central beliefs are. Others will join because they care about the stand the congregation takes on social justice causes. And again, they may not care about the beliefs. For me, belief is paramount. I strive to have my beliefs guide my behavior. For example, since I believe in the inherent worth and dignity of others, I strive to be respectful and considerate of my fellow humans. That is not to say that I always succeed, but I am glad to be part of a faith community that holds up the inherent worth and dignity of each person. The father of American Unitarianism was Reverend William Ellery Channing. He is most remembered for saying that we ought not to take the miracles described in the Bible as literally true, and that we need to apply logic and reason when it comes to interpreting the Bible. Messages like these from his pulpit resulted in a parting of the ways from the more doctrinaire Congregationalists. That rift is a big part of how American Unitarianism developed in the 1800s. Today, we UUs cherish our fourth principle, encouraging a free and responsible search for truth and meaning, even though, as was stated last Sunday, this is challenging to accomplish. We can thank Channing, among other UU leaders of the past, for holding up this precious right. We also invoke our fifth principle, declaring the right of conscience. Centuries before Channing, another Unitarian patriarch, Ferenc David, declared this right when he established the Unitarian Church in Transylvania in the 1600s. As you can see, Unitarians of the past were free thinkers and questioned the authority of the established church. They relied on reason, logic, and science as something each of us must come to on our own, and not just rely on what is handed down. The right of personal conscience was held in high regard. Many of you are aware as well that the Buddha maintained a similar position. When Janet and I were married, we chose to have an ethical humanist leader officiate. We did not want to marry in a church or synagogue, and we did not want a religious ceremony. Both of us sought to leave behind the faith traditions we had grown up in, Orthodox Judaism for me and Methodism for her. I was in my clinical psychology internship at the time, and I invited my supervisor, Clyde, to attend the wedding. He happened to be a defrocked Catholic priest. His observation to me after the wedding service was that there was no authority present. I had enormous respect for Clyde and hung on almost everything he said. This was one of the few times Clyde was wrong, in my view. Janet and I and the humanist leader did not invoke God in the wedding ceremony, but we did invoke the awesome powers of nature and of love in the references we used in the ceremony we created and in our vows to each other. My point here is that appeal to authority of a higher power can take alternative forms. It does not have to be traditional to be valid and personally meaningful. Ralph Waldo Emerson, another Unitarian leader who profoundly influenced our faith tradition, was also an iconoclast. In his famous speech delivered at Harvard Divinity School, he admonished those present not to trust in the traditional church authority. He was convinced that the dictates of your own conscience, rather than an authority, was the path to a truly faithful life. In another of his famous works, his essay on self-reliance, he said this: "Whoso would be a man must be a nonconformist. He who would gather immortal traditions must not be hindered by the name of goodness, but must explore if it be goodness. Nothing at last is sacred but the integrity of your own mind. Absolve yourself, and you shall have the suffrage of the world." I remember an answer which, when quite young, I was prompted to make to a valued advisor who was wont to importune me with the dear old doctrines of the church. On my saying, "What have I to do with the sacredness of traditions if I live wholly from within?" my friend suggested, "But these impulses may be from below, not from above." I replied, "They do not seem to me to be of such. But if I am the devil's child, then I will live from the devil. No law can be sacred to me but that of my nature. Good and bad are but names very readily transferable to this or to that. The only right is what is after my constitution. The only wrong is what is against it." As you can see, Emerson was firmly convinced in the power of his own nature to guide him. He was not concerned about the possibility of being influenced by the devil. He just dismissed that concern as if it was nothing to worry about. And yet, we can all think of people who have been led to erroneous and, in some cases, even dangerous conclusions by being too insulated from the input of others. In fact, one could make the case that delusional ideas in mental illness stem in part from social isolation and the lack of input from others. Therefore, I can't quite go along with Emerson to the degree that I dismiss any guidance whatsoever from an external authority. But we have also seen, especially recently, how blind adherence to evil authority can be disastrous as well. Maybe you have been told to make your own choices regarding religious belief is egotistical. In a sense, you might be accused of putting your own will above God's will. Have some of you heard this kind of accusation? Okay, fine. But how do you or I legitimately determine God's will? And which version of God's will? Many priests, ministers, imams, and rabbis will say that their way is the only way to salvation. But they are very different paths. Is it ritual circumcision, or bowing to Mecca, or taking communion that gets me to heaven? Well, they can't all be right. As I have said, I personally cannot completely embrace what Emerson said in his essay. I have witnessed too many people, including those with mental illness, who have been led into false and even destructive beliefs because they were too resistant to authority of any kind. Others, as we have discussed, seem to cling to pseudo-authority not worthy of such respect. So for me, a reasonable approach to the question of which authority to embrace as a guide, I look to some commonalities of all rather than to pick one religion at random and hope you got correctly your ticket into heaven. The fact that the major religions of the world have been around for a long time suggests that at least they have something of value to offer as a guide to living, in my opinion. And the values that are held in common among the major world religions seem to me something worth embracing. We can also turn to authorities that are renowned scholars of religion for guidance, people who have devoted their lives to studying world religions objectively, comparing one to another. My list of scholars of comparative religion would include the names of Houston Smith, Karen Armstrong, and Stephen Prothero. It is hardly egotistical to approach the question of authority in this way. Here are some values and practices that are common to most of the major world religions. You need to care for yourself, and you need to care for others much as you do for yourself. You need to practice forgiveness and compassion for yourself and others. It is worthy to work for justice and to practice mercy. It will be beneficial to see our world and life as sacred. You need to work for the common good. You need to have faith in the future in spite of discouraging events and people with power and evil intentions. You need to transcend your ego to connect to a larger reality than yourself. You need to engage in daily practices that remind you of all of this. That's probably an incomplete summary, but I think it gets at a lot of what the major religions share. What role should science and reason play in your choice of a spiritual path? Some of the rabbis that I was in contact with as a youth said none. They regarded science as the enemy of religion. They did not want me questioning the idea that the world was created in 7 days, approximately 6,000 years ago. If you did not take the Hebrew Bible literally, you were a sinner and you would go to hell. I believe I can still be a person of faith, adhering to the mutually agreed upon values I mentioned. In my view, science and reason are tools to help assess the legitimacy of what is given by way of authority. The Dalai Lama said the same thing of his religion, Buddhism. If one of the tenets of his faith was contradicted by science, he expressed it was fine to let it go. Finally, I would agree with many who raise up the right of conscience in our religious convictions. This is part of our fifth principle. What if a religious text tells you to do something that your conscience tells you is wrong? The Hebrew Bible says that if a man lies with another man, he should be put to death by stoning. By extension, all sexual activity between consenting adult males is prohibited in Orthodox Judaism, as well as it is in Catholicism and in fundamentalist Protestant sects. In spite of the fact that there is broad consensus among these different religions that queerness is sinful, we UUs challenge biblical authority on this point as a matter of conscience. Our conscience tells us that it is wrong to condemn queer love. Instead, our conscience tells us quite the opposite. If two people of the same sex love each other and want to share their lives in bed together, we want to support and celebrate their bond. So as Michelle pointed out in the message she read last Sunday, taking UU seriously is not easy. It is challenging to sift through the choices that are before us to decide who we trust as authority and what we select from authority, what the facts are, what we come to believe, and how we determine to act. Even if this task is daunting, I submit it is better than any alternative. This work does not have to be done in 1 week. I consider it the work of a lifetime. More important than arriving at an outcome, this work can be considered a journey. Our fellowship's mission statement said it so well. And so I'm going to quote in closing from our mission statement. We embrace Unitarian Universalism as a dynamic living religion that welcomes change as knowledge advances. We cherish the wisdom to be gleaned from our collective human history, as well as personal experience. We seek congruence between our beliefs and our actions. We gather in this spiritual community to commit our collective energy and resources in support of these principles. May it be so. Thank you for listening, and let us now have a hymn.
Trust the dawning future more, and bids the soul in search of truth, adventure boldly and explore. Prophetic church, the future waits your liberating ministry. Go forward in the proclaim the truth that makes us free.
Okay, so this is your opportunity now to make a donation in support of our fellowship. And you can send your donation either through Tithely, or you can write a check and send it in the mail to Ramona Stein, according to the instructions in your order of service. And if you will please join me as we bless the offering. Let this be an offering to sustain and strengthen this place, which is so sacred to many of us, a community of memory and hope, for we are the keepers of the dream. And now I have a few closing words that come from a well-known and regarded Unitarian Universalist minister, David O. Ronkin. We believe in the authority of reason and conscience. The ultimate arbiter in religion is not a church or a document or an official, but the personal choice and decision of an individual. And that, with that, I will now invite discussion.
I'm reminded of something I heard, I don't know the source, a long time ago, is your life is made up of choices you make and actions you take. I believe that one's conscience is made up of that as well. And I agree with what you had in your talk about the fact that you try to act in according with your beliefs and your conscience, but you don't always measure up. So you have to keep working on improvement every day.
Yep. The person that may have said that, or one of the people that I know said that, was Ralph Waldo Emerson.
Thank you.
Sure. Don't be shy.
Victor, I wanted to thank you for your talk because it encapsulates a lot of what I struggle with as a teacher. When I teach Comp 1, a major focus is critical thinking, and
Yeah.
really flexing those muscles. But we also do research papers, and it's especially recently, in recent years, so difficult to convince students that Breitbart is not a scholarly source and they cannot use it, right? Like not for an academic assignment. And so the balance between authority, because sometimes I just want to say, like, guys, respect the authority of scholars, like just listen to them. But at the same time, developing their own critical thinking skills, it's difficult for as a teacher, but also as an individual, thinking through things
It's
myself.
so
So
hard,
thank you,
Katie, to veer away from what you were brought up to believe, right?
Yes.
I think that's a part of it. Do you think?
Yeah.
And maybe some of your students are stuck in that spot, and it seems scary to somehow move away from that, like some loss of connection with your community if you do that, right?
Yeah.
Do you think that's part of it?
Yeah. And I think it's pretty blatant, that some students are told by their family members they're, getting kind of uppity or something, going to college.
It's discouraged, yeah.
Yeah.
You're being egotistical if you think for yourself, yeah. Well, I'm sorry you struggle with that, but I can't think of a better person to address that, because I think you bring, Katie, in addition to your skills as an academician, you bring a personality that is humble and yet striving to be helpful to others. So that's a force that you bring. Your presence is a force.
Thank you. That's sweet.
Katie, I would say you just nailed on to something. I tend to have foggy thoughts, and once in a while somebody nails it for me. But what a terrible position we're in socially right now, that there's so much, what is the word I want? People don't believe that there's objective truth out there unless it's in their bubble. And these bubbles that we're in are scary, and people are just following. I don't know, they decide who the authority is and then they follow unquestioningly what that is. But coming from my own side, trying to make sure that what I believe is based on fact and truth is not all that easy. How did everything get so darn hard? Anyway, if anybody has any real authorities to let me know who to follow, just be sure and let me know. Thank you.
Thanks for your comment.
Victor?
I'd like to suggest that if that authority, now in our home, first it was mom, then it was dad, and he was always right, of course. But you can follow that authority or from whence you got your beliefs, and at the same time have them disagree with what you're doing. In other words, my dad would never have told me to go to the military. At the time I was 21, I made that decision. And afterwards, as many of you know, I stood up and became a conscientious objector, but he taught me to do that. He taught me those things and didn't see his teaching leading me in that direction. He just didn't want me to go to the military. So I was doing what he wanted, but not the way he wanted. And you can do two things at once.
Yeah, that's a good example, Bruce. And someone else wanted to speak at the same time, whoever you are, please.
It's Cal.
Hey,
How are you doing? Thanks, Victor. I really enjoyed can you hear me okay?
Loud and clear.
Okay. I just, really some good comments too. And it's just so difficult to, not just to help other people think about who they're choosing as an authority, but to look in the mirror with that. And I think I'm really good with that. And then I realize all of a sudden that that's not true. And I think the best I do is catching myself from time to time. And the one thing I'm thinking about a lot, and just your talk really helped, is just, I think the most important vaccine right now is the vaccine for the virus of polarization. Because no other vaccine is going to get us anywhere if we're not using it, and we need leadership that models and facilitates use of that vaccine.
Where is the vaccine?
And I think the vaccine is, if I had to oversimplify, really seeing, and I don't mean seeing like just visually, people in terms of inherent worth and dignity, and acting that way. And it's real hard. A good example, and it's kind of a plug, we've talked about Braver Angels. I've seen a couple of things on Braver Angels during the past week. Just kind of low-key and informal interviews with people that were at the Washington rally on the 6th. Not going into the Capitol, but just really relaxing and listening to their perceptions of how they were so dismayed by the way that evolved, and also really shocked about reactions that they've gotten as individuals because they chose to go to a rally.
Yeah.
And I think that's important to hear.
Yeah.
So it's good. It's good work. And we'll work on the vaccine. Let me know if you find a really, really good one, because I think that's what's going to get us there. And thanks so much for your talk.
Oh, you're very welcome. And I'm thinking there's not one vaccine, just like for the pandemic, we've got like 4 or 5, right? I don't think there's going to be one vaccine for anti-truth, for lies. But I think part of it is, the groups like Braver Angels, and dare I say, Unitarian Universalism and other faith communities that respect truth and respect legitimate authority. I think that the spiritual, there is an opportunity there for a spiritual vaccine, I think. Yeah. And I admire people like Katie, who's working with students to help them become more critical in their thinking. So maybe there are many vaccines. I hope there are. And each of us can be our own little vaccine as we participate in the world. So you want to make a comment, Janet? Come on up.
I'm trying to articulate this, and I don't know if I'm going to make it, but I'll try. And that is, my favorite part of your talk was the summary of the shared beliefs from many religious traditions. I think with a little time and maybe a good academic resource, we could come up with that on our own. But to be reminded that there are these many values that we share as human beings that most of us could agree on. I think in terms of how we approach this amazing divide in our country is to be reminded that we have to relate to people in terms, just like we would relate to a person of another faith, try to find common values that we share. And Katie, I don't have any suggestion for how you do that in a classroom. I don't know that your students are sophisticated enough to know what the importance of academically rigorous information. But I think that's where we have to keep coming back to is, well, we all love our families and we all would like to live in peace. And, you know, those very basic things that perhaps we can connect with each other on. So does that make sense? Thanks.
Thanks, Janet. Maybe we have time for one or two more comments.
I would add that to what Mom was just saying, that there are hopefully a shared belief that you know, people have equal inherent value, and I think one of the things that makes a source of information illegitimate is when one of its underlying currents is in opposition to that. And furthermore, I think a lot of people right now are totally content to just sort of arrive at skepticism as like an ending point, rather than using that as a beginning point to really then verify and follow up and, you know, vet that information properly.
So if I'm hearing you correctly, Aaron, what you're saying is that we have our own internal work to do to look for inconsistencies and to see if things make sense. And perhaps the better job we do on ourselves, the more we are able to be a vaccine. Yes?
Yes.
Okay. One more comment, and then we'll close.
Well, if nobody else is in here, go ahead, Cal.
Well, just really quick, I was kind of laughing. One experiment we could try is putting a sign on the fellowship door saying "Baskets of deplorables welcome here," and then fastening our seatbelts.
We've had a few of those before, so I think we know how to do that. And the fine lady from Gillette, whose name I can't recall, please go ahead.
Oh, it's Diane, but I just really like the idea of getting stuck at skepticism. I try to keep some Facebook friends. I haven't unfriended everybody that disagrees with me because I think you need to hear from the other side, although sometimes I have to keep scrolling. But it seems to me like people can get stuck. I've had several of them say, I'm done with everything. I don't believe anybody anymore, you know, and I have a tendency sometimes to lean that direction myself. And I'm going to keep that in my mind. Don't get stuck on skepticism. You have to keep looking for what's out there that's real and right.
Yeah, I certainly agree with that. And I think for me, it's also a process of continuing to update as I'm able. Well, thank you all for listening and for such great comments and questions. I'm glad that this topic is something that is stimulating and hopefully will lead us to better places. And so we'll extinguish the chalice now. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again. And I would invite anybody that would like to stay on and continue in fellowship, just pretend you have coffee and a donut and just enjoy each other's company. Oh, and next Sunday, we have the opportunity to hear from Bill Bradshaw.
Have a good week.